Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate the outpouring of support that we have received for this event. The reaction and the reception has been quite overwhelming, and all of us are very appreciative of the time that you're putting aside to join us here. So I would like to welcome everyone across multiple time zones, multiple countries for this event. My name is Lorne Kelton, and I am privileged to be moderating this important panel on critical mental health conversations. Now, this free event is being hosted by the foundation of the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers, and the foundation certainly appreciates any support you may be able to give, and donations can be made directly at the CAPS Foundation website at capsfoundation.com, and there'll be more about that in follow-up communication after this event. Now, there has been no shortage of adjectives to describe the challenges that countless millions have faced over the course of this past year. More than 40% of Canadians alone say that their mental health has declined since the COVID-19 pandemic was declared in March of 2020. So today's conversation also ties in with the Canadian Mental Health Association's Mental Health Week that runs from May 3rd until May 9th. Now, their theme this year is get real about how you feel and name it, don't numb it, which I believe dovetails nicely with the topics that we'll be discussing today. Now, before I introduce today's esteemed panel, I'd like to have you please take note of the following information, which I'm just going to put next to myself on the screen. And let me let you see that a little bit more clearly. So I'd like you to please note that the information provided during this presentation is not a substitute for professional advice. And if you feel that you may need medical advice or counseling, please consult a qualified healthcare professional. And if you or someone you know is in immediate danger, please call 911 or go to your nearest hospital. And if you're from outside of Canada joining us, please do verify your local service providers for this critically important information. Okay, at the conclusion of our event today, we will be posting some resources where you can turn to for specific support. And this information will be based on, as I said, Canadian support services. So again, please verify what those equivalent services may be in your local area. So without further ado, and I'm just going to bring up all of our panelists again. And let's do this. Okay. I hope we can see everybody. Without further ado, allow me to introduce these 5 remarkable professionals who are going to be sharing their insights and experiences with you today. First is Dr. Sajel Bellon, who is a behavioral science professor, a psychotherapist, stress specialist, and professional speaker. Sajel is also a foremost international expert, having helped thousands of first responders and their families deal with the implications of occupational stress in workplace and domestic situations. She teaches them to put their pain into context so that they can see the possibilities. And as the creator of Mind Armor, she has the strategies we all need to help us cope and adapt today. Now, following Sajel will be Dr. Bal Pawa. She's a Harvard-trained integrative medicine physician, TEDx speaker, and best-selling author of The Mind-Body Cure. She educates and inspires people to take charge of their health through her unique Reframe toolkit. We then have the inimitable Patricia Morgan, who has been described as a therapeutic counselor, author, mother to 3, grandmother to 5, and happily married, at least most days. Today, she's going to be sharing with us how to understand loneliness and what to do for yourself and others. After Patricia will be Monique Caissie, who's a former crisis interventionist and mental health counselor who now demystifies communication blips to strengthen workplace relationships. And today, she's going to be sharing tips on how to talk with someone about suicide and how to protect yourself mentally. Now, rounding out our esteemed panel is Ruth Sirman, who is an internationally certified mediator with more than 25 years of experience working in high-tension, high-conflict situations. She has a long history of critical incident stress diffusing and debriefing, and in disaster recovery. and she works with people experiencing disruption, distress, and trauma. Now, each of our 5 presenters is going to have 10 minutes to speak to their specific topics. And believe me, we realize that you may want to discuss these topics well beyond that time limit. But in the interest of time and ensuring that we do get through everyone, we will be holding to that time frame. Should you wish to reach out to any one of our panelists following the event, they will be making their contact information available to you. And in addition, we will be providing a list of free resources that our panelists are generously making available to you at no charge, and these will be shared in an email following today's event. Just before I turn it over to our first presenter, some of you may be wondering why there are no men on the panel. And I can assure you that this is not by design, but rather an organic gathering of professionals who have stepped forward to share their insights. And some of the women on this panel work as much with men as they do with women. And trust me, they're all very well placed to address the mental health challenges of all genders. That said, however, statistically, mental health illnesses disproportionately do affect women. 47% of women are considered at high risk of developing mental health disorders compared to 36% for men. 26% of young women have self-harmed, which is more than twice the rate of young men. Women are nearly twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with depression. Women who have experienced childhood trauma, such as sexual abuse or physical violence, are 3 to 4 times more likely to encounter depression as adults. Women have significantly higher rates of developing PTSD following exposure to traumatic events, which is at least double that of men. And an alarming 80% of individuals with eating disorders are women, which has the highest overall mortality rate of any mental illness. There are also a host of societal factors that we just can't get into today that tend to increase women's susceptibility to mental health challenges. But notwithstanding these statistics, men are making significant progress in terms of talking about, sharing, and seeking treatment for their own mental illnesses. So perhaps we'll see a shift in these statistics over time. So let's get started with our first speaker, Dr. Sajel Bellon, who will speak to us about being emotional unapologetically. Please take it away, Sajel. I don't think we can hear you, Sajel.
It would help if I unmuted. So welcome, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here with you and excited to share, hopefully, some new ideas around being emotional unapologetically, and to get you to think about emotions in a different way than we have typically have. Basically, today, my hope is that we'll be able to redefine how we've been looking at emotions. How many of you out there have been told, don't be sad, don't be angry, made to feel like some emotions are positive, some are negative? We want to take that definition away. We want to rewrite it. We want to reinvent it. And we want to understand that we have a spectrum of emotions and that all of them are different and actually have purpose. So we're going to talk about, again, sort of taking away that label of being positive or negative. We're going to look at the language of emotions and the spectrum of emotions that we may feel. So how many of you through this pandemic have been really going through what feels like a roller coaster of emotions? Well, today, like I said, we don't want to talk about them from a negative or positive perspective, but rather a renewing function or a depleting function. So emotions either renew us or deplete us. When we talk about anger, sadness, fear, those emotions tend to deplete us. Joy, happiness, gratitude tend to renew us. So just understanding emotions from a different perspective can change the way that we relate to them. Here's the good news. As you've been going through this pandemic, you have been resilient. You've been adapting to change. We're wired to do that. We are wired with our surge capacity. And what surge capacity is our ability to face and deal with crisis. The reality is that we're able to deal with that on the short term. The reason why we're feeling very emotionally depleted is this pandemic has lasted a lot longer than a lot of us had planned or foreseen. So all of a sudden, our ability to respond to crisis in the short term is now being stretched and expanded well beyond some of our capacities in terms of the long term. And that's why a lot of us have been feeling so drained lately. So when we talk about the power of emotions, they can send us on an upward spiral energetically and experientially, or a downward one. So just think about the momentum of energy, and understanding which emotions deplete you and which emotions renew you, all of a sudden put the power of emotions in your hands. When you feel like you're being really drained and strained, feeling emotions like boredom, disappointment, worry, discouragement, revenge, jealousy, anger, sadness, know that you can intentionally participate in activities that will help you feel more hopeful, more optimistic, more enthusiastic or passionate. And what that does then is help reverse that negative spiral, that downward spiral, into an upward spiral. Again, it helps for you to feel like you have more control. When we look at redefining emotions, we also want to look at the function. So meaning that, we all feel them, and emotions are not only just feelings, but they affect the way we think. They affect the way that we physically feel, so that it's a system of responses. And a lot of them are universal. So a lot of us know what happiness feels like. A lot of us know what anger feels like. But as individuals, we may express them very uniquely, and that there's unique combinations for each of these emotions. And it's really important for you to understand how emotions show up for you. Because the better you understand yourself and your emotions, it allows you to be able to then understand others better. Just think about the impact that that has on your relationships, or could have on your relationships. Now, when we look at reframing emotions, we understand that they have a purpose and function. Again, not good, not bad, not positive or negative. It's about purpose and function. Emotions help us inform our actions. It motivates what we're going to do or the way we think. And it also communicates to other people. Think about a crying baby. When a baby cries or expresses sadness or despair or or anger, what does that do? That causes us to go and soothe, to comfort, to do something. It communicates and motivates connection. And it leads us to make informed decisions about what we're going to do. So I want you to think about that in a different way. Emotions have a purpose and function. They're not just random reactions. So they help to motivate our action and help prepare us physically for whatever it is we're doing. It helps to inform our decisions and reactions, and it helps us to communicate with others in our community through body language, through verbal cues, through our actions with others. We also want to think about how complex emotions can be. Think about an onion. I can give you an example. When one of my clients is really angry, everyone perceives them as being just angry. And what are they angry at? But if we were to ask the right questions and peel that first layer of anger off, we often find that it's connected to fear or sadness or some sort of other uneasy feeling. So the idea is to understand that emotions are not just one layered. They're very much multidimensional. So anger can be actually rooted in fear, which is rooted in sadness, could be due to loss. So for example, if you've suffered a real loss in your life, you are fearful in new relationships, And when you're fearful and no one's listening to you, or you felt like you're not being heard, it can be expressed as anger. And then on top of that, if you've done something embarrassing or what you feel is embarrassing as a reaction, you then feel guilt or shame. So we can see the cycles that emotions can lead us on so easily. But these are true of not only depleting emotions, but also those renewing emotions. So remember, intentions do matter. So when you reflect on your emotions, I want you to think about, what are they telling me? So the next time you're angry, why am I feeling angry? What is anger trying to tell me? How has anger served me in the past? And what would my desired outcome in this situation be? So instead of choosing how you may react to this, you all of a sudden have choice, and you can actually choose to respond to the situation differently. By having awareness of what you're feeling, how you're feeling it, and why you're feeling it, it gives us choice. It gives us that time to think about the logic and the facts in the situation. So we're not just randomly reacting to people, but we're actually thinking about our consequences of our actions and what our desired outcomes are. So that's the difference in being able to leverage your emotions to cause you to respond to a situation versus react. So the purpose of today really was just to have you think about emotions in a different way. It's not something that you just randomly react to, that just kind of randomly comes up, but versus looking at emotions as a tool, as something that has led to our survival, has led to our connection, has led to our many experiences in life. Emotions are good for you, all of them. And so be emotional unapologetically. Thank you. Bal, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Sajel. So you just heard about the emotional state, and I'm here to tell you how our emotional state relates to our physical state. So for 30 years, I've been a physician, and the first question I ask when I go into a patient's room, how are you feeling today, Mrs. Smith? So feelings, I've discovered, are the language of the body, but thoughts are language of the mind. And we have 60, 70,000 thoughts a day, but we don't attach to every thought. But if we do, and our pattern becomes what we call a fear-based pattern, we then learn that that fear state translates to feelings in the physical state. So for example, our nervous system, which is like an engine, it's located in the brainstem, it translates every second what you're feeling. So if you're in a fearful, threatened state, as we've been for the last 1 year with the pandemic of uncertainty and fear, it dysregulates our nervous system. So our nervous system starts to produce cortisol and adrenaline. And if it's prolonged and excessive over a long period of time, just as we've been experiencing, well, it translates into symptoms. And some of these you may relate to. Sleep, insomnia is a big problem right now. Mood, anxiety, depression, what we're talking about today. When you're in a state of fear perpetually, then you're going to show up differently in the body. Hypertension, high blood pressure. The brain can be poor focus or memory loss. You can have gut issues and breathing problems. And for women, if you're perimenopausal and having periods, you'll notice that your periods change in frequency, or you might see heavier periods. You might see more PMS, premenstrual syndrome. You might see more moodiness and irritability. So women are especially prone physically to the emotional state as well, because cortisol and adrenaline, there's a hormone symphony in our body, and cortisol and adrenaline can upset the female reproductive cycle as well. So it's important for women to know that they're vulnerable from a hormonal state. But what do we do currently in our medical system? We're throwing a pill at every ill. Prescriptions for insomnia, for depression, anxiety are going up every single month. And I'm here to show you that some degrees of anxiety and depression you can control. You can prevent some of these symptoms. So we're all familiar with the fight or flight response. Our nervous system has a gas and brakes. So if you get revved up and you see a saber-toothed tiger, automatically, you don't have to think about it. Stress is automatically. It revs up the adrenal gland, you produce cortisol and adrenaline. The problem is that cortisol affects every system in our body, including our immune system, our heart. We can get high blood pressure, increased heart rate. You know what it feels like when you have acute stress and a dog jumps out in front of you while you're driving. Well, imagine if you lived like that all the time in a state of heightened response. Your heart takes a beating, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, and gut problems. And of course, the brain that produced stress can actually be stressed by the stress that it produced. So it's not good for your brain to have cortisol and adrenaline on all the time. Now, how have we been coping with stress? So we learned that our emotional state you can name, and the Canadian Mental Health Association this year is focusing on naming it. And so we want to say, okay, what are you doing when you feel stress? How do you cope with stress? Many of us medicate in different ways. Some of us take coffee to wake up in the morning because we're so exhausted from the night before. Some of us are having a couple glasses of wine or more in the evening to relax ourselves. The sales for cigarettes, alcohol, and cannabis also went up in this last 1 year. So it gives you a great indication of how we've been self-medicating. And of course, comfort foods. The number of bags of Doritos that have been sold. I mean, at one point, stores were sold out of Doritos. So it goes to show that we as humans tend to emotionally eat when we're bored or we're stressed. And sleep deprivation or excessive screen time, prolonged sitting, all of those things contribute to our well-being. So we can learn to name our emotions. We can learn to tame our emotions, but we can also learn to reframe our emotions so that it doesn't affect us physically. So I've created a reframe toolkit, and this is a really handy little acronym to say, well, let's look at this situation differently. We can't control what's outside of us, but we can control how we show up. So reset, exercise, food, rest, awareness, mindset, and examine. And we don't have time to go into all of them, but I'm going to show you how to reset your nervous system when you're in an emotionally fearful state. So to reset your nervous system, the first thing you want to know is how important the breath is. When you take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale through your mouth and hold it for about 5 seconds, what you're doing is you're learning to regulate your nervous system by using your vagus nerve. It's very powerful. So that's how you reset your body out of fight or flight into rest and repair. It's like putting the gas pedal, taking the foot off the gas and putting your foot on the brake. So it gives your body a chance to repair itself. So that's the first step, reset your nervous system to get your body out of fight or flight into rest and repair. The second thing that you can remember is, how do we reset our mind? Our mind is so active, we're inundated with information. So this is a neat little formula called SODA. And it has to do with how we have the ability to think about what we're thinking. That's called metacognition. When you say, oh, why the heck did I say that? Why did I do that? That ability to think about what you're thinking is called metacognition. And that's how you can reset your mind. So you stop and you calm down the mind. You observe your thoughts and you can name them and tame them. And then the D is for detach. Detach from the fear-based thought and turn it into a trust-based thought. So you affirm a new thought. And this has to do with the neuroplasticity. If we do this often enough, where we reset our body out of fight or flight into rest and repair, and then we reset our thought processes so that they change our nervous system by using the SOTA technique, eventually your brain learns to default to a better system of coping. So this is much better when you practice it over and over. Say you're feeling a state of panic or fear, reframe that thought and turn it into a more positive thought, something that you can control, something that works for you. It's very important. Right now, we've got a tsunami of mental health issues. I think the coronavirus has done something very good in that it has removed the stigma of mental health. People are open to talking about it. There was a time when if you were feeling anxious or you're feeling very depressed, you didn't want to mention it because there was a stigma attached. So what Corona has done and the pandemic is evened out the playing field. People are having conversations saying, look, I'm hitting a brick wall. I'm feeling really demoralized. I'm feeling scared. We're sharing our feelings and we're all feeling the same thing, the fear, the uncertainty. But mental health has many manifestations, and disease mental health can be mild, moderate, or severe. So I want to urge you that if it's mild and moderate, please use some of these tools that we're going to give you today, and prevention is the key. But if your disease is to a point of escalation, you're debilitated by panic attacks or your depression, you're feeling so hopeless that you don't feel like getting out of bed, please contact your mental health services and your healthcare provider so that you can get the help you need. There's no magic formula to keeping healthy and fit. You have to really, I think the big discovery and the big epiphany that I want to share with you is that I was a patient myself. And you have to learn to advocate for yourself and grab onto the power that you have. The father of medicine, Hippocrates, said, the natural forces within us are the most powerful healers. So when we grab on to that ability of knowing that we can regulate our emotions, we can regulate our nervous system, and thereby regulate our physical feelings, it's a tremendous sense of empowerment. So I want you all to know that you have that power and nobody can take that from you. So get in touch with your inner self by using meditation, not always medication, and try to do some of the inner work. And if you can't, there's no judgment on that. Sometimes your symptoms require intervention, and that's okay too. So with that in mind, I will hand over to Patricia, who's going to talk to you about loneliness.
Thank you, Bal. So loneliness, I wish I had known something about that word back in the spring of 2020 when my counseling therapeutic practice kind of escalated with people responding to COVID-19. But it became very personal when in September of 2020, sitting in my office here, and all of a sudden I burst into tears. And I started to observe the tears, my nervous system, asked myself how I was feeling. Feeling words came up as sad, empty, lonely, started to notice my body, started to notice my skin, largest organ in the body, and realized that I was feeling lonely. Lonely for my children's hugs, my grandchildren's hugs, my friends' hugs, the people that used to come and go from the house. Because of a husband who's immune compromised, we had a very tight bubble. So I began to snuggle more with my husband, ask our son, who was allowed in our bubble, to hug more. And when he'd go out the door, I would say, hey, I want another one. So in this journey, I began to research loneliness, and organizations started to ask me to speak about it. And this definition of loneliness, I'm going to show you right here, is by a loneliness researcher. Cassiopo. And basically, loneliness is that discrepancy, that space between the relationships that you have and the relationships that you want. It's a very loose definition. It's got that bundle of feelings that I described, and your feelings may be different. You may come up with, as Sajel talked about anger, and it's kind of noticing all those pieces and what is that feeling trying to tell you. So I'm one of those people that had that moment of loneliness. But who are the lonely? So there was research, there's been research done on this over the years, and the researcher Julian Holt Lundstedt came out with her research in 2010 after 10 years of studying this, and said, yes, the researchers such as our Canadian Angus Reid Institute, who indicated in October of 2020 that actually the myth was that seniors were the loneliest demographic group. Turned out that actually youth are. When you consider the developmental stages of being a human being, once you become a youth, a young adult, you're ready to stay out of the house. You're ready to spread your wings. You're ready to spend less time at home with mom and dad, with siblings. So if you have youth in your circle, keep your eye on them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are struggling with loneliness, but that is the highest demographic in Canada. In the US, a study came out that moms at home were the highest demographic, and youth were the next demographic. And how do we really tell who are the lonely if the demographics just keep your antennae, your framework open? It is some of the pieces that previous speakers, Bal and Sajel, talked about. And it includes unexplained emotions. It includes depression, anxiety, dementia increases for older people. Yes, lower amounts of sleep or higher amounts of sleep, more drinking alcohol, more food. You know what? That emptiness of loneliness we're seeking to fill up, and other health issues that turn up. So Lundstedt's research ended up concluding that you have 50% longevity in life if you have this. This is the antidote to loneliness, and that is connection. So Lundstedt came out in 2010 with her research, and then the World Health Organization in 2018 started to have alerts about the whole situation of loneliness. Headline said, loneliness, the pandemic. Well, then what happened was we had this pandemic, which exacerbated people feeling lonely. So Angus Reid poll concluded that it's important for us to measure how much a person would like to be alone. Now, I have a hubby who likes to be alone. Don't bug him. But the other day he just said, yeah, I like to be alone, but I like some attention too. So don't make assumptions about introverts. People have introverted preferences and those people that have extroverted preferences. We all need some attention, but it's for each individual. I want you to think about yourself and think about the people you care about, how much attention they want and how much they just want peace and quiet, curled up, enjoying the sun, especially now that spring is here. And yes, we're all experiencing a certain amount of anxiety because we have to be alert to look after our own health and the health of those in our circle. But here's one little thing that we can do to stop this pandemic of loneliness. And this is to not pass on the term social distance. I feel quite frustrated, and I hope you join me in this, with every evening, my hubby loves to watch the news. They refer to this term social distance. That is the last thing that we need during a pandemic when we're being asked to isolate ourselves. My daughter and grandson right now are quarantined. They're just itching to get out. And so we're phoning more and we're doing FaceTime. more with them, to compensate. We need to find during this time ways to compensate about making those connections which keep us healthy. So I want us to say, yes, we need to have physical distance. And what can I do to fill my social needs? The previous Surgeon General of the United States, Vivek Murthy, recently released a book in 2020 called Together. And he concluded there's 3 kinds of connections, relationships that we need for us to stay socially healthy. And the first is confidant. The vulnerability researcher Brene Brown talks about where and when to define when people are emotionally safe to either share your story or to hear your story. Like who in your circle is got that capacity, as Sajel talked about just accepting all feelings unapologetically and not hearing that, oh, there's no reason to be angry. There's no reason to be afraid. This is just a bunch of hoax. No, somebody that we feel held by, heard by, acknowledged by. And it's best to have 1, 2, or 3. 1 is a little confining. Consider yourself lucky if you've got 1, but also know that it's probably wise to develop relationships where you have 2 or 3. Right now, there's many groups that are organizing themselves around Zoom. I belong to a couple women's groups, and I actually belong to about 4 of them. And there's 2 in particular that women, and sometimes a male, will just weep about what's going on in their family. Because some of us have too much on our plate. Some of us are living with too many people and we can't have some space. And then there's others that are living alone and are longing for somebody to come in their space. Yes, cliches come up around COVID-19, and that is we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. Some boats are empty and some are crowded. So we have to accept what's going on for other people and not assume that our experience is somebody else's experience. The second aspect of having connection and social health that Murthy talks about is a sense of belonging to a close-knit group, often family. I have 2 women in my life. One is from Ethiopia, that's Gannett, and a dear friend, Jeanette, who call me their substitute mother. Actually, Gannett calls me her Canadian mama, and Jeanette her substitute mother. And so if you don't have a family that's either available or maybe toxic or deceased, whatever the situation is, know that there are people that are open to being your auntie, being your uncle, being your grandpa. I adopted a barber years ago when my father really wasn't available to me emotionally or mentally in a lot of ways. And this barber became my substitute father. You want to have a group that you feel I belong here. And the third area, which we as CAPS members are very lucky to have, is a sense of community that shares similar values. Notice our values. Here we are providing mental health information to as many people as we can reach as speakers. And a community helps you be on purpose, to make your contribution of your gift. So why do we get up in the morning? To make some kind of contribution to make this world a better place. So do find your community if you haven't already have one. And you might want to make your social collage. Especially during this time, it's a lovely little therapeutic piece to do, is to take some photographs or maybe even do it by some sketching, or maybe you just write some names of the people that you have, that your confidants, where you belong, and where you have a sense of community. And I want to, before I finish, talk about the importance of oxytocin. Well, oxytocin is that hormone that we get from getting our touching needs met. It is so important for us to have our touching needs met. And it regulates emotions, helps regulate emotions. It helps with empathy. It helps with trust. It's called the love hormone, for goodness sakes, when you get really intense with the touching. So an oxytocin has this sense of being alive at the same time as calming our nervous system. So how the heck do we get our touching needs met when we're so confined? I used to look so forward to going to my CAPS meetings because we speakers are crazy huggers. Just a little caveat there, if 1 in 6 women have been sexually abused, you want to check. I have a wonderful friend at CAPS called Pomo Carpino, and he says, hug permission. And I say, yes. So you want to get permission. And once you got the permission, I do this with clients. I say, do you like to hug? Is it comfortable to hug? And if you do, I'll hug at the end. We'll hug at the end of sessions. Well, now we're doing virtual hugs. I'm teaching people to do virtual hugs. This skin, this largest organ in the body, needs to be touched. I look in the camera and I say, I want you to imagine I'm hugging you. Cross your arms, squeeze your elbows. Right. So hugging needs, here's some other options. Some people are buying pets. Great. Gets, again, that's that touch. But here are a couple more ideas for you. Hang on. I have to do a little something to show you. And here you go. Well, that feature's not working. So back to me. I am going to give Monique a big, generous hug. Please accept it, Monique, and tell us about that hard topic that may happen when people are feeling chronically lonely and don't know it. And as I give you the hug, I'm going to tell you what to say if you suspect that you have a loved one, somebody you care about that's feeling lonely. You go gently, cautiously, and say, might you be lonely? Because there is still a stigma about being lonely. There's a perception that we don't have any friends. And Monique, you're a dear friend. Take it over.
Thank you, Patricia. I was sitting, it was a Tuesday afternoon, I was sitting at my desk at the crisis center, and Rachel, she had just joined us. It was my first day working with her, and she was sitting across from me. She was a student from McGill University, the School of Social Work, and she was going to do her internship. So she was told, just listen to everybody talking, and you can ask them questions after. So I get a call, and this woman is telling me her story. And it is really, really hard. She's experienced a lot of sadness and a lot of tragedies, really. And I could hear it in her voice, and I'm listening, and she kept saying, there's no point. There's just no point to all this. And she was saying, and I would ask her, well, what can you do? And she'd say, there's nothing I can do. Now, there's 2 words. If you only hear these 2 words in the few minutes I've been given here, it is hopelessness and helplessness. When we can hear those words and we can see it in their body, we need to be aware of those 2 words, because for me, that's usually when I start digging a little bit deeper. And she was telling me that I've been diagnosed with depression, and now I'm on an antidepressant and it doesn't work and I feel worse. And so I asked her, are you thinking of hurting yourself or even killing yourself? And she said, yeah. So I asked her, do you have a plan? And she said, yeah. And she shared it with me, and it would have worked. So I said, listen, I have a different plan. I want you to let me help you. I want you, please let me help you. Let's try something else first. And so I convinced her to go to the hospital. I wanted to go pick her up and bring her to the hospital. She didn't want me to do that because people would see me. And so I said, just go then and I'll meet you there. And so she was going to go and call me with the nurse. And then I would go join her and keep her company. And so I'm typing in my notes, and Rachel looks over at me and she's like, wow, whose model of intervention did you use? And I said, what? And she said, what model of intervention? Who did that model? And because at McGill, they're very theoretical. And I said, well, actually, no, I didn't use anyone's model. You see, I was homeschooled. my mother had bipolar, and this was something that we had to deal with. And I had a friend in high school whose mother had committed suicide, and it just turned out that way, that I had a lot of different people that showed me what it can look like. Now, there's a lot of signs that we've already gone through: the sullenness, the different emotions, sleep being changed, too much sleep, too little sleep, mood cycles. There's also one that if you see someone suddenly picking up speed and they just seem to be happier and they're suddenly giving all their stuff away, that's when you really need to red flag. Okay, just put one on there. And one of the things that she had said was she had started an antidepressant. And when you start a medication like that, that's actually a higher danger, because you still feel crummy, but the medication starts working and it gives you more energy first, but you don't feel better. You feel like you have energy to do the action. So that's why I'm saying, when she said she just gotten on antidepressants, she felt hopeless, she felt helpless, I need to do this. Now, I want you to know, you don't need any special training. You may have actually already saved someone's life and didn't know it. In fact, I didn't get trained for suicide intervention until 1 month before I quit that job. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the time, so I just did what I thought. And there was this one woman I picked up from the psychiatric ward, and when they go on new medications, it's not stable at home, they would come and stay with us for a couple of weeks sometimes. And she had decided she would kill herself, but she hadn't done it. She ended up in the hospital. So I did ask her, well, what happened? And she said, well, I had it all planned out, and I was even writing my letter, and like my letter of goodbye, because that's what you're supposed to do. And she said, and my friend called and said, hey, it's a beautiful day, let's go for ice cream. And I said, wow. And that's all it took? She says, yeah, I wasn't giving up on ice cream. I could put that off. And her friend asked her, what is going on with you? How are you feeling? And ended up taking her to the hospital. And that's why she was saved that day. So this wasn't in October. This was during the summer, and ice cream is a big deal in the summer in Montreal. So the tools of the trade to be a suicide interventionist are this: empathy, non-judgmentalness, compassion, and kindness. I, as a mental health counselor, I was asked to go to the local police station and help them understand what's going on when you're kind of having to deal with someone who may not be well. And I simply asked them this: how do you want to be treated if this is happening to you? Now, remember, you're out of touch with reality. I was talking to them specifically about psychosis. You are feeling overwhelmed. All of these juices are floating around in your brain, and now it's malfunctioning. How do you want to? How do you need to be approached? And that made all the difference in how they were going to deal with people moving forward. I could see it on their faces, like, oh, they thought like containing them and getting them to the hospital by force. But that doesn't work, because the next time they'll run when they see you. So there's a little bit of training that goes on with everybody who's involved on the front lines. Now, I've sat on the edge of a gurney with complete strangers, relatives, and friends. The beginning of this process doesn't take a degree. It just takes kindness. And I'm going to get a little personal now, because almost 4 years ago, I was involved in a car accident. And what they totally missed was the extent of the brain trauma and its effects on me. I have always suffered from anxiety from the time I was little. I'm very sensitive to feeling judged and ridiculed or even shamed. I grew up in a shame-based family. And I'd also been diagnosed with ADHD, but I was really high functioning, so it didn't feel like a big deal. But both of these took a big hit. After my accident, I was unable to work. In fact, it took almost 3 years before I can say my executive functions of my brain are finally getting aligned. Right after the accident, my husband lost his job of 19 years. And then soon after that, 6 family deaths in 6 months. One of them, my mother, and it was her decision. Another one was a suicide where he hung himself and my relative found him and she's not over it. So I developed a clinical depression and recognized it when nothing that I could do, all the stuff Bal talked about, taking care of ourselves, couldn't stop it. And suicide ideation followed me like that big black dog. And I started thinking there was no point, that my family would be better off without me. So I spoke to my doctor and we made a plan, and it included medication. And I know what that can do. So I let my family know, and I'm doing really well now. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but you know the semicolon, like when you write a sentence and you put a semicolon and you finish the sentence, it's like it's more than a comma, but it's not a period. So it's not the end of the sentence. Well, they use that as a symbol now. When people are dealing with suicide or substance abuse, that little semicolon gets turned into different images. So on my mom's birthday, after her death, I got a tattoo with the semicolon in my parents' honor. My dad was an alcoholic. And this is a picture of it. It's on my wrist. You can see it's a butterfly with the semicolon and the butterfly with the two hearts. And that is in honor of my parents, which I can see when I look down at my wristwatch. Now, I'm not going to state statistics except this one. 4 out of 5 people traditionally suffer from mental illness. And during this pandemic, this number is going up. We've been talking about that. So we need to be there for each other. And we don't replace the medical professionals. Actually, we are part of the team, because a person's outcome has more to do with who is surrounding them at home than what's going on at the clinic. So we all need to be that person for someone else, or we need to find that person for ourselves if we're having doubts. There are people there ready to help. So if someone's emotions are loud, pay attention, help them pay attention. And if they stop taking care of themselves and they seem sleep deprived or anything, just like Sajel was talking about and what Bal was talking about. Or if they seem lonely, do they seem lonely? Ask them, like Patricia told us to do, or take them for ice cream. Ask them, how have you been? Really, I want to know. And learn how to do what Ruth is about to show us, to de-escalate, so you don't end up in this state of overwhelm. It takes a village. And this is a CAPS Foundation small contribution towards starting the dialogue towards self-empowerment and mental fitness. So now I'm going to toss over the Zoom podium to my good friend from Ottawa, Ruth Sirman.
And all I have to do is find the unmute button buried behind the webcam. Thanks, Monique. So as Lorne had said, I'm Ruth Sirman, and there are a lot of aspects that we could talk about today, because this is a massive topic, and it's a massive topic with a whole lot of moving parts to it. And how you react to things and how others react to things may be totally different. It doesn't mean one person is right or the other person is wrong. They're just different, and they're real for you. Our intention when we discussed what to do with this session was to be as practical and as real as we could be. And I think you've heard some pretty real stories. I want to focus on the reality of how we interact with others, and in particular, how we interact when we're under stress and or we're in high impact situations. And we are in, as people have said, unprecedented times. I've been a critical incident stress debriefer and diffuser since 1997. I'm not doing the math. Critical incidents are often seen as one big thing. Monique talked about her car accident. That could be a critical incident type situation that you might have to deal with. But critical incidents or critical incident stress just doesn't come from just those big events, those life-changing moments. It can also come when we start layering a whole lot of smaller situations, but the level of impact those layers have starts to add up. And so I want you to keep that in mind, because I've had a lot of people who've said, I couldn't possibly be dealing with critical incident stress. You know, I wasn't at a motor vehicle accident. My house didn't get destroyed in a tornado. I haven't been through a flood. I haven't had anything. But when you stop and you listen to them, there is a major level of ongoing incident after incident after incident. So as a mediator, I spend a significant portion of my time dealing with people who are in conflict. And those conflicts are also causing stress in their lives. And I never know when I start in to deal with people just what else is going on in their lives or how they are being impacted by what is happening around them. And we all bring who we are to the situations that we find ourselves in. And in addition to, you know, our intentions and how we want to help or what we're trying to do, we're also bringing all the other layers that Sajel talked about, that Dr. Bal has talked about, that Patricia has brought up, and all of the things that Monique has talked about as well. And so when we come into those kinds of situations, we're typically experiencing a whole range of emotions as we deal with whatever is going on in the situation. And conflicts can happen on a whole lot of different levels. I will tell you that on a professional level, I very rarely meet people when they're having a good day. And so as a result, I tend to see people when they're struggling the most. And that can be a real challenge. And sometimes it's hard to pick through what's going on. So there are a couple of things that it's important to recognize. Most of us, I think, if we were to ask you, are you more comfortable offering to help or more comfortable asking for help? Most of us would err on the side of offering. And that can be a challenge when we find ourselves in a situation where we actually need some help, but it's not really part of our makeup. And I'm speaking from experience here. I will help anybody. But boy, it takes a lot for me to say, you know what? I actually need some help on this level. And I've done more of it in the last year than I have, I think, in the last 65 years of my life. And so, you know, as a result of that, I would invite you to give some thought to where you're at on that one. Because I think just since I'm the last speaker, I kind of get to sum up a little bit what everybody else is talking about. And a huge part of this is about awareness. So there are a couple of things that I really wanted to touch on. How many people here, and since I can't see you raising your hands, I'll just ask you to think about it. Do you have any triggers or buttons that people push sometimes? Now, if you have, yeah, there is a raise hand function. Go ahead. Because the reality is that we all have things that set us off. And you will know what some of your triggers and buttons are, but you may not know what all of them are. But if you ask other people in your family, the people that you work with, the people you hang around with, your friends and colleagues and coworkers, they will know what those buttons are because they will have seen it. And if you think about it, our reaction to those triggers and buttons can change, and it can change fairly dramatically. So if you're a parent and you have a 2-year-old, and all of a sudden this 2-year-old for the very first time goes, no. Most of us as parents would look at the child at the time and go, oh, isn't that sweet? He's learning to be independent. Now, when that same 2-year-old goes, no, for the 36th time in 23 minutes, I can promise you, your reaction is not, oh, isn't that sweet? Because there's a point where the more often we experience a situation, especially something that can be a button pusher, the more likely it is that our response is going to go negative. And the more often that negative trigger gets pushed. Now think about what happens when the child is 6 and they go, no, and you've been listening to it now for 4 years. I can promise you it's not, oh, isn't it sweet? He's learning independence, and he's still learning independence. And there's a whole lot more likely response of, enough, I said no. The reality is that we can experience what I would call button fatigue. And button fatigue is when a button gets pushed over and over and over again to the point where it gets a little raw. And as it gets raw, our reaction tends to get stronger, and the amount of trigger that we have to experience to set it off gets a lot shorter. And so if you're a person who has a short fuse to start with, you may find yourself actually losing it. And I think everybody at some point in their life has lost their cool. And, you know, think about what that's like. There's often a lot of damage control needed afterwards, because that's when the filters come off and we tend to say things that we wouldn't necessarily say, or do things that we wouldn't necessarily do. So if you're a short fuse person, the window or the length of the fuse gets a lot shorter, and you can react pretty darn quickly without necessarily really wanting to. If you're more of a slow burner person, then what happens is you continue to be a slow burner, but each of those times that the button gets pushed or that the pressure goes up, it's like putting a finger over the pop bottle and starting to shake it. And when you finally do lose it, you're more likely to actually explode because there's a lot of pressure behind it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Be aware of how you're reacting to situations that you would normally be able to manage. And is the reaction starting to be a little more intense, more faster, more out of control than it would be normally? So that was one point that I wanted to make. And part of that, and I will say that this affects all people. And there are a couple of things that we haven't really touched on too much. And that is that everybody reacts in their own way. There is one gender thing that I would like to say, and that is, with all the disaster recovery stuff that I've done over the last 20 years, I've noticed something. And that is that typically dads, husbands, male colleagues are often trying to hold things together for everybody else. They want to be the person who's strong. They want to make sure that their family is okay, their partner is okay, their kids are okay. And so they suppress what they're dealing with, and it tends to come out in other ways. And after the tornadoes in 2018 that hit Ottawa, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of men who had lost their houses. And I said to them, you know, like, nobody is okay. Because I would say to them, how are you doing? And they'd say, oh, I'm okay. And I said, no, you're not. Nobody can be okay when 137 houses in a town of 1,100 people are gone or destroyed to the point where nobody can live in. Nobody is okay right now. And when I start to talk about some of the things that others have raised about sleeping, about eating, about headaches, about memory loss, hard to focus, all of that, and they say, oh, I have all of that. Say, okay. And that's the indicator that you need to be concerned about. So there's one other thing that I wanted to give you as a tool, just to think about. So here's something I want you to consider. And that is, if you had a pond in your yard, and in your pond there is one lily pad, and in that lily pad doubles every day. So it grows, the number of lily pads in the pond. So every day, if you had one on day 1, then on day 2, you have 2. On day 4, or on day 3, I'm going to back up. On day 3, you have 4. Every single day, the number of lily pads in the pond doubles. On day 30, your pond is so full of lily pads that you couldn't pack another one in with a shoehorn. I want you to think about this, because what I want you to answer is, on what day was the pond half full? And just put your answer in the chat. I'm only going to give you a couple of seconds, so don't think about it too long. We've got some really good mathematicians and scientists on here. A lot of people will say that the pond was half full on day 15. The reality is, no, the pond was half full on day 29, because every day it doubles. And what that means, when I give you, I'm just going to share a screen with you here for a sec. When we look at the reality of the kinds of situations that people are dealing with, we're looking at what is essentially an exponential growth curve. And can everybody see a growth curve on there? I just want to make sure I got the right screen selected. Thanks, Monique. So exponential, if it was day 15, you'd be looking at a line that would start down here at 0. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. And it would go up in a straight line up to where it says crisis. That's the 45-degree across the graph. An exponential growth curve is the one that we're talking about, though. And what you'll notice is down here, it takes a long time before you actually start to see that things are getting bad. This is where we want to be. This is where we can prevent things from getting bad, or we can resolve issues when they arise. The challenge is that when you get up here around day 24 to day 29, now you're into where you need to contain the situation or do damage control. And so this is where it becomes critical. If you think about this, I use this one as a time delay curve, and you can use it for a lot of things, but think about your stress levels. Think about your coping levels. If this is where you become in crisis, what you don't want to do is wait until you're up here to realize you've got a problem. And so I would invite you to pay attention. What are the warning signs for you personally that your level of coping is struggling? Where are you in terms of the loneliness that Patricia was talking about? Where are the body symptoms that Dr. Bell was talking about? Where are your, where's your capacity to manage what you're dealing with? And where would you put yourself on that curve? And if you are from anywhere from here up, that's a really good time to start seriously looking at getting some professional help. If you're down here, can you recognize where the pressures are coming from that are moving you along? And can you take steps to move you back down the curve? We always want to take steps that move us back down the curve to where we're essentially buying time so that we can react. If we don't realize that we're in crisis until day 29, you've got a pretty short window to be able to do anything about it before you get into Monique's area, where now you're dealing with major challenging situations. So I want to wrap up on that, and I want to just focus on the fact that every one of us are different. The conflicts that we are experiencing are frequently worse when we're in stress situations because we're not necessarily processing, coping. Our capacity is reduced. And so we tend to act out. We tend to, and other people around you will be acting out as well. And so you'll see it in others, but don't be afraid to look at it in yourself as well. In summary, physical separation doesn't mean disconnecting socially. Use your networks to provide support for yourself. Whatever you are experiencing, it's real, and it helps to recognize it and acknowledge it. And if you need help, it's okay to ask for it. There are so many things we can do to improve our own situations, to take some control back over the things that we can control, recognizing that there are a lot of things right now we can't control, and we do have the ability to reset our responses. And on that note, thank you. Back over to Lorne.
Thank you so much. Very, very powerful. Wow. I think everyone will agree that we have been treated to a tremendous amount of insight and information. And as I said at the very beginning, there's no question we could go on for a couple of more hours. And based on the chat feed and some of the questions that are coming in, that certainly is true. In the time we have remaining, I would like to get to the questions because we had a very large turnout today, and I would like to get to as many of the questions as possible. And if we cannot get to all the questions, then I will certainly present them to the panelists offline. And if they have the opportunity, they may have an opportunity to get back to you directly with an answer. But with the panelists' agreement, what I'd like to do is just ask, I'm going to get to the questions in the Q&A, but one is pressing from my point of view, and I'm going to open it to anyone who would like to answer. But the question is this: having heard the five of you address different aspects of mental health and the challenges that they face, both internally and externally, and the fact that the caregiving side of it was also touched upon, which is often overlooked. Given the awareness, the plethora of awareness campaigns around mental illness that we've been exposed to over probably the last decade or so, do you believe that we have begun to put a dent in the stigma attached to mental illness? Because quite frankly, that's the word that comes up again and again. We have people here, you, who have spoken personally and professionally about your own realities. People in the chat have spoken very, very eloquently about their own challenges. But I question whether or not that dent is really starting to make a difference or not. So, Monique, would you start us off with, and just brief answers would be great if we can go around the table. Monique.
I just wanted to say that I feel there is a shift, and it's coming from the young people. I have young adults as children, and they will talk openly about anxiety, or I'm OCD on this, and they're aware, and they even talk about their friends with openness and kindness. Now, I don't know if it's because they live here with us, but I'm seeing that more and more in the young people. So I have a great deal of hope.
Great. Others on the panel that would like to just give their views on the trajectory you've seen with respect to breaking down some of these barriers? Yes, Sajel, thank you.
You know, in working with high stress occupational sectors like first responders, emergency services, which are predominantly, traditionally have been predominantly male, we have seen a shift, especially in the last 5 years or so, where mental health is becoming prevalent in conversations. I think there's a huge shift in awareness. We see Bell Talk campaigns and things like that happening on national levels as well. So I think the awareness has definitely made a shift. Where I think we need to have more shift is in action, in making services more accessible, in actually giving people the tools and ability, now that they're more aware, what can they do? So I think that's the sort of the next place that we need to see a shift.
Thank you, Sajel. Dr. Pawa, I'm sure you have something to say on it.
I can certainly say I'm working in the trenches with mental health every day. And certainly there's an expanded awareness of mental health and a willingness to have conversations like this. So I agree that the awareness piece is there. But I have to say that it's really difficult for patients to get into a psychiatrist or get in with a psychologist. Everybody's just overwhelmed. So more and more, we have to provide places where we can give them tools for self-empowerment and how much can they do to prevent an escalation of their symptoms. So I think the focus should be more on education and tools and resources that we can provide to people so they can do a lot of self-care now more than ever. It's required, it's needed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, when you speak to someone like yourself mostly all of the panelists here, but I would think, Dr. Pawa, in your particular case, when you are in the trenches, it must be incredibly both joyful when you see the progress, but also incredibly saddening when you know the resources are stretched to that limit and people could be helped if those resources were there. Did anyone else want to comment on that? Because I have one other, Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, there's something that came up for me, and it's coming directly out of the work that I do as a mediator. I think it's one thing to address the stigma on an individual basis in terms of, am I willing to have this conversation? Are my friends and I willing to sit down and have that conversation? There's another level of stigma that we don't very often talk about. It's the stigma of, on a more systemic level, of things like, will your long-term disability insurance cover a disability due to or time off due to anxiety or depression or so on. And I remember, because I'm a PTSD survivor, 25 years, it's under control for the most part. But when I applied for long-term disability insurance, I was asked, have you ever sought mental health support? And when I said yes, because we went through a whole lot of counseling after my kids were hurt in an accident, we went through a lot of counseling after that. And I was denied long-term disability related to anything related to mental health, anything. for a period of 10 years after I took out the policy. So I think there are other levels of stigma that we have to deal with, and they are not being addressed.
Wow,
Thank
that's
you, Ruth.
wonderful. Wow.
Last word to you on this question, Patricia, before we go to the
Right.
audience.
I just want to mention that the world of therapy and healing has increased in its awareness and its ability to heal. EMDR has moved into even more modalities to treat trauma, and so we've become much more effective but it's again the funding. And I just want to point out that COVID, as well as many of the movements, have created more divisiveness in our communities and our countries and our culture than we've seen for a long, long time. So the increase is going like this of demand, and the ability to support is going up like this, but the funding and support politically and goodwill is not there.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go to our first question that came through from our audience today, and it's addressed to Dr. Bal. We like to call her Dr. Bal. And it goes like this. Do you believe we can get attached to depression so that it gives us some type of control over a situation that is out of control? In that way, we become our illness. We benefit from it to some extent so that we don't want to let it go. The person says that they're not calling anyone out. They just feel that they were themselves subject to that. So is that something that you can address, Dr. Bell?
Sure. I think to sort of fine tune the word attached might be habituated is a better word, but our brain does become habituated to a certain way of thinking. We wake up every day, we have all these thoughts, but many of them are repeat thoughts from yesterday. So there's 60,000 thoughts, but the majority will be from yesterday. So we get into patterns of recognition and habituation. And yes, when you get into the depression category, there are different kinds of depression. There's the genetic, there's the neurochemical, there's situational. But if it's situational, certainly we can become habituated. And if your personal reality becomes your personality, then it's a seamless line. So you can't tell that this is what you've created and now it's become your personality trait. So your personal reality became your personality. What I tell patients is, look, you have your mind. That's your programmer. You have your brain, which just memorizes things. That's your computer. And then you have your body, which is like a display screen. That's what displays your symptoms. But if you want to change what program is running in the body, you have to go back up and talk to the programmer. And that's the metacognition, your consciousness, and rise above it and say, am I just a product of my conditioning? And change the program so the brain plays a different program. And then you get a different outcome. I mean,
Wow.
It goes much deeper, but that's the brief answer.
No, but it really does speak to the interconnectivity of the emotional, the cognitive, the psychological, the physical, the physiological. I mean, it is a fully entwined system. Thank you for that. The next question, I believe, is directed to Patricia. And the question is simply, is loneliness an emotion, or are some emotions indicators of loneliness?
Well, the question kind of has the answer, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on what research study you've done that they coin loneliness as a feeling. But I like to go back to the baby, the pure emotional system that the baby has. And really, loneliness is that sense of disconnect. And I'm not getting the attention I need. I want attention. And so the antidote to loneliness is, as we talked about, social connection. But okay, so the feelings, the baby's feeling sometimes rejected, sometimes neglected, sad, don't have what I want, nobody's here caring about me. Yeah, so those feelings when I broke out in September was an emptiness, feeling empty, the body response, the sadness, the hollowness, and sort of a longing for, yeah, to even have my skin touched, right? Yeah.
Thank
Hope
you.
that answers it.
Very helpful. This question's a little bit more involved and has a few parts to it. And let's see if we can, in the time we have, address a couple of pieces of it. And it goes like this. How do we talk to a relative's GP or perhaps family physician when we notice that they seem sad and that they tear up a lot. We don't know exactly where the relative is at and don't want to miss something. How do you respect the level of privacy for the person and yet help them when they may be in denial? I'll throw that out to Monique, please.
Yeah, so this is something I had to deal with a lot with my mom, and even my father. And the thing is that a doctor is not allowed to speak to you, but you are allowed to speak to them. And so what I would do is sometimes I would send them a note, and I knew they were going to tell Mom, your daughter has been in touch with me, but I didn't care. I needed her to get the help she needed, right? And so, yes, there is a way, but the communication will be unidirectional, and they're not even allowed to come and say, did my intervention help? They're just not allowed. So just do it. Even if they're not looking at you, keep talking in the hallway at the hospital or whatever, they'll hear it. And that's it. That's all I have to say about that. Just do it.
And as a physician, I can certainly say I have lots of family members or friends send notes during the 20, 30 years of my career. I'm not allowed to break a patient's confidentiality, but it really gives me perspective when I have a caregiver saying, you know what, she's not getting out of bed. She's not putting her lipstick on. And it might be, it provides me perspective. It provides me another view because I only see the patient for those 5 or 10 minutes. And then the rest of the time, that might be their reality. So it is helpful. Go and talk to their GP. The GP may not give you much feedback back, but it helps them to make the decision for that patient.
And if I could add one more little thing, when people would be taken to the hospital, I helped a lot of people take their loved one to the hospital who was psychotic, who was a danger to themselves or others. That was part of my job as a mental health worker. And they'd say, well, as soon as they get there, they will contain themselves and appear normal. And I would say, what would trigger them? And they'd say, oh, if I showed up. I said, great, wait outside the door till the doctor shows up, then just pop your head in, and then they'll scream. And we need the doctor to know, or they can't treat it, because so many people it's like a revolving door for them, because they convince the medical professionals, I'm fine, I'm doing great, because they are able to contain themselves. So that's another piece of,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sajel, thank you.
Yeah, when working with clients, I always encourage them and remind them that they live in systems. They live in their family system. They have a work system. So, having the insight from other people is really helpful. And I usually start the conversation by saying, well, how would this person describe what you're like in the morning? And then sort of open them up a little bit more to even bring them in, a family member or the persons that they're closest to, in on the session, so we can actually have a conversation together. Again, not where I'm guiding it, but where it gives opportunity for even the person in the chair to be able to share with their loved one how they can be best supported, what could change within the living system that would help them do better, because I'm only with them for that 1 hour a week. But what else could be happening? And so I always encourage family members, or I allow the person to invite whoever they want into the sessions as well, so that they can start to create a safe place no matter where they are. So, and it provides an opportunity for that member to also provide information or insight that we may not be getting in the room.
Thank you. That's very much appreciated, Sajel. Ruth, you get the last word on this question.
There was just one thing, and that is that sometimes the conversations need to happen, and it may be tough to get that person engaged in the conversation. There are a lot of times where mediation is not just about workplaces. It's not just about harassment complaints. It's not just about it. It's families who need to sit down and have a conversation about what they see going on with somebody there who's going to help keep the conversation focused, on track, and so on, and come up with a plan for how you're going to deal with things. Now, that in and of itself is something we often don't think about. But yes, absolutely get medical help. But if you really need to have a conversation with somebody and they're not necessarily engaging in that conversation, then it doesn't hurt to ask for help with the conversation end of things. And the other thing I would say is somebody who has dealt with a number of different things, both with my parents and also with my kids to some degree. There were times where I actually took a video of what I was seeing and I would show that to the doctor and say, just help me understand what it is that I'm seeing right here, right now, because I don't know how to deal with it. And you'd get I had no idea that was what you were up against. And in many cases, it has changed the conversation. So just a thought.
Thank you, Ruth. I appreciate that. We are hitting the bottom of the hour. I know the panelists have agreed to stay on a couple of minutes extra, but some do have to move on to presentations taking place later today. But we have received quite a number of inquiries. I'm going to see if I can get to a couple more, if the panelists will agree to stay on just a bit longer. We have a question that asks, how do you offer support to a friend who's just survived COVID, fortunately, but whose partner is in ICU? The person is distressed, and I want to help them while waiting for answers. So there may be a number of layers to peel back there, but do you have some suggestions or insights as to how that person might help with that scenario?
Do you want me to jump in? I mean, we all have thoughts on that, I'm sure. So I think all of the speakers today provided a reference point and framework. So the friend who's the supportive caregiver, sometimes it just, all you have to do is show up. Sometimes you feel like, I'm not equipped to deal with this. But if you just show up and provide listening, and provide and be the 411 responder, not the 911 responder. So the 911 responder is jumping in to try and walk their journey, but a 411 responder is when you just show up, you're supportive, you can show up with food, you can show up with some resources, you can take them for a walk in nature, you can do safe things given they may have been exposed to COVID, but you're showing up in and saving a place of listening and non-judgmental awareness for that person. So it's really that you just show them that you care and that they have a safe place to be. And you don't have to have necessarily the skills and the counseling and the background. It's enough for that person to know you're there.
Thanks, Dr. Bell. That's very well said. And the notion of empathy, which is a word that gets thrown around a lot, and I think today it's been thrown around in the right way, and sometimes it's thrown around, and assumptions are made about what kind of support people need. And you've shone a bright light on the fact that showing up can, in and of itself, be a potential gateway to reducing stress, anxiety, et cetera. And there's a term I like to use in some of the work I do called tangible empathy, which simply means I like to see, and it touches on what you just said, Dr. Bal, what can you actually do physically other than just showing up? Think about what it is that person may need that they're not in a position to share with you. Who else? And Monique, you talked directly and indirectly about this. Who else is in a position to shine a light on what the needs of that individual are if they cannot do it themselves? So thank you for that. Monique, you wanted to speak to this? Or did I?
You sort of touched on it, but yeah. So when we show up, we think that we have to have the right thing to say, and sometimes the right thing to say is, "I have no idea what to say to you. What can I do? How can I help? What would be helpful? Can I bring you a casserole? What do you like? Are you allergic to anything?" Just get curious and start looking for things to do for them that they won't have the energy to even ask for. It might be to go trim their bangs. I don't know, anything. Take them for ice cream is my favorite these days. But yeah, it's just ask them if you don't know and say, "I want to help. How do I help?" Yeah. Perfect.
All right, we're going to get to one last question, unless someone wanted to address that particular point before I move on. Go ahead, Ruth. You're on mute.
I would just add one quick thing to what Dr. Bell and Monique have said. The most powerful words in those situations that I've come across go like this, and you're welcome to write them down. You know what? This situation absolutely sucks.
Sucks.
And what you're doing is you're acknowledging the unbelievable level of challenge that they are facing. And too often we jump in to try and help before we actually indicate to them that we have at least a sense of what's going through. What do you want to avoid saying? Oh, I understand what you're going through, because, you know, my daughter had pneumonia a couple of years ago, and, you know, we kind of wondered how she was going to be. Your experience is not their experience, and they don't superimpose well over top of each other. The quickest way to upset somebody is to sit there and try and either one up them or in some way make it about you, or that you understand their situation. Even if you had exactly the situation, your journey is not their journey. And so the simplest thing you can do, as Monique says, is how can I best support you? Because quite honestly, this situation sucks. And in this situation, I don't even know if I'd be coping as well as you are. Just be real about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would think you'd also want to be very careful not to diagnose someone's situation based on your own lived experience, as helpful as it might be, and not just because of all the negative
Absolutely.
implications, but it could create that kind of a wedge. One last question, and then we're going to wrap up and thank the panelists. And by the way, the responses in the chat and Q&A are very warm. People are very thankful for the information being put out there. Some have said it's overdue, and that the angle that we've been taking and you've been taking is new and refreshing. So I'm very, very happy to hear that. So here's the final question for today, and it's open to everyone. And the question is, are we any closer to mental illness in all of its manifestations being defined or even perceived in the same light as physical illnesses? And you know where we're going with that question, because we know how comfortable it is to say in a very sad way that my relative has been diagnosed with cancer, and how we perceive that, or that they're going in for a bone marrow transplant, or they're having a hernia operated about, oh, she's bipolar. Oh, my father has schizophrenia. It's remarkable how things seem to, though we're making progress. So the question is, are we closer to that perception in your estimation? Sajel, please.
Yeah, I'd like to open that one up with a sort of personal story. My husband was diagnosed with PTSD as a first responder in 2016, made a successful return to work in 2019. And it was a huge, huge challenge. And one of the things that I advocate for now are invisible challenges or disabilities. So return to work, from a systemic level, return to work policies, procedures, the way we go about things is very much still geared towards the physical illnesses or challenges, and not at all accommodating to the invisible ones, the ones that we can't see. So that's just one aspect of the journey of mental illness versus physical illness. I have a whole myriad of stories that I could tell you from the learnings from that journey. But the return to work one is one that I can tell you right off the bat is still has a lot of work to do.
It looks like we might need to do a part 2 to this series. Okay, thank you for that, Sajel. Yes, Monique, please.
Just a quick, one of the, and there's so much to talk about in suicide, but one of a high suicide rate that people don't realize is what Sajel just mentioned, invisible illnesses, which is pain, people with chronic pain. And I used to run a group at the McGill Health Center here at McGill University for people with chronic pain. I have chronic pain. I struggle with it. And people don't realize just how that just wears at you. It just does, right? So we just have to be aware that I've already forgotten the question here.
It's about how what's it going to take for society as a whole to recognize
for the
it.
brain. Yeah. So basically when people tell me, oh, she has a mental illness, I say, oh yeah, her brain's been affected by her environment, or because the brain is an organ in our body. And when we are suffering from mental illness, that means our brain has been suffering. So I call it brain disorders. when people, when they're really, really stuck on it, I say, well, it's a brain disorder. Are you interested in making sure your brain's functional?
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
that's very helpful because it brings a physiological component to the discussion and moves it away from something that's invisible. Dr. Bell, I know you have stuff to say on this, please.
I had a lot to say. I wrote a book on it, but the thing is, because it took me being a patient for 7 years and going through the system and realizing what was missing. So integrative medicine means that you actually connect the mind, the brain, the body. It's all one beautiful system. It's not just a sum of its parts. And that's what we've been doing in interventional medicine. It was designed to work for the emergency patients, you know, throw a drug, throw an intervention, but there's not a lot of focus on wellness or prevention. And integrative medicine tries to go to the root cause. And as a patient for 7 years, multiple surgeries, many medications, following a horrific car accident, I realized that's what's missing. We're missing putting it together. We're missing involving the patient in their care and looking at how the mind, the brain, and the body work, and even just our immune system. Psychoneuroimmunology is a new emerging field. So our psychology affects our nervous system, which is inextricably linked to our immune system. So that's just one system. So when you talk about physiological diseases, almost every system will manifest stress in different ways, whether it's autoimmune diseases, gut issues. I have done so much research and I'm trying to bring my colleagues on board, and it's coming, but it's slow. And integrative medicine is becoming a burgeoning field, but it's due to patients and consumers who are telling their doctors, look, you're not going to the root cause. You're just giving me a drug. I don't want a pill for everyone. No. So it's driven by consumers.
I'm going to have to let my daughter know about that branch because it may be the new burgeoning field for her.
Talk to her.
All right, potential. What doesn't have to be the last word, but on this question, Ruth, go for it.
I think there's a couple of things. I think when we start talking about invisible disabilities, we have a pre-programmed mindset that it's easy to abuse. And so I've heard managers who've said, well, I don't really know, you know, like they're saying they're depressed, but, you know, maybe they just want time off. Maybe they just want, you know, they don't really want to do the work. So, you know, like they're asking for an accommodation, but I'm not really 100% sure that, you know, we need to give it. And so we tend, it's that minimizing, dismissing, and inability to, or unwillingness to give someone who's asking for an accommodation in a workplace, for instance, the benefit of the doubt that they're asking because they have a serious issue. And as, because I've had conversations like this with my son, and he said, well, nobody in their right mind would say, oh, you know, just think happy thoughts and your cancer will go away. And yet we have a tendency to do that kind of thing when somebody says that they're struggling with anything from anxiety to depression to bipolar. You know, well, just, you know, find things that make you happy and it'll all get better. And somehow or another, we've got to get past that mindset so that we equate mental health issues at the same level and treat them with the same seriousness and take them seriously as we would somebody coming in on crutches with a cast on, where you can tell right away what they've got for a problem. So it's a challenge. There's no doubt. I think like everybody else has said, I would totally agree. We have a long ways to go.
Thank you. And thank you for that. And on that note, we will wrap up the questions. We will capture them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be following up with an email to everyone who registered, along with some resources from this amazing panel who are going to be providing you with yet additional resources. Of course, no charge on those, that will help you take your journeys, hopefully, to the next and to a better level. Before I formally thank the panelists, I just want to put on screen a list of resources. These are not resources that the panelists are providing. These are mental health service resources for our Canadian contingent. So I'm going to put that on my screen and just go full screen for just a brief second here, if I may, as I just want to highlight on my right here, the suicide prevention line for Canada. The number is there. I won't read it out. along with text information. There's the Kids Help phone line. I was surprised to learn just this week that the Kids Help phone line isn't actually just for kids. It goes up to the age of 25. So we have some people joining us today who are in that age category. So that line has been up for many years and gets a lot of attention. And for Indigenous persons, both those who may have joined us today or those you may know, there is a dedicated Hope for Wellness helpline across Canada for those wishing to seek immediate crisis intervention with knowledgeable counselors. For those of you joining us outside of Canada, please do research what resources or equivalencies to these are available in your jurisdiction, in your country, in your town. I do hope that they are available to you and that you will take advantage of them either for yourself or for others in your orbit. So with that, I'm going to come off this screen. I am going to remove my spotlight and hopefully we are all together again. So with that, allow me to thank Sajel Bellon, Dr. Sajel Bellon, Dr. Bal Pawa, Ruth Sirman, Patricia Morgan, and Monique Caissie for sharing with us their remarkably insightful, heartfelt expertise in each of these categories of insight. Their contact information will be made available, as I mentioned before, in a follow-up email. So if something did not get answered, or if you do need to probe a little bit further with some of the topics that came up that perhaps didn't get fleshed out, I know that they'd be willing to reply to you. So without further ado, I bid everyone a great rest of the day, and thank you for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.